I presume you're here in order to learn of Magecraft. I'll have you know, there's no room for the weak-willed in this course, and despite your best efforts, the sorcery of our time is but a fraction of what it once was in the Age of Gods. Much of the craft is established through pedigree, and the culture of mages is riddled with deception and moral depravity. That said, if you insist, I shall do my best to educate you in this miserable, yet fascinating world. In our previous lesson, I spoke of various mythological conceptions of the underworld. As human technology backs mystery into a corner, death and the afterlife remain one of the few things we still hold out on for our ontological security. This enables mages to preserve and manipulate the soul in interesting ways. In a sense, the Throne of Heroes is another form of afterlife, one exclusive to legendary figures throughout history. Of course, that wasn't its primary purpose. Initially, heroic spirits were needed to fight the beasts of humanity, and now that we know a bit more about this dynamic, I hope to cover it in today's lesson. More specifically, we will discuss what is currently known about the Grand Servants deemed necessary to defeat the beasts. Earth is saddled with an especially cruel burden compared to other celestial bodies. Our planet's will, Gaia, seeks to protect nature from any and all threats. Humans happen to be nature's greatest enemy, and yet, paradoxically, we are also very much a part of nature ourselves. This is why Gaia has split into itself and Alaya, a derivative will meant to mediate between our interests and the planet's. In other words, Earth has to protect humanity, while also protecting itself from humans. Such a dilemma exists within human nature itself. Good and evil, positive and negative, are polarizing forces that each rely on the other to exist. One is literally defined by the other's presence. In this way, humanity can never truly rid itself of evil. Thus, when it comes to heroic spirits, there must always be a threat or villain for heroes to oppose. Formally, we refer to such threats as the beasts of humanity. I've already discussed many of these beasts in an earlier lesson, but I'd like to reiterate how counterintuitive they are. In order to become a beast, one must ironically possess a love for humanity, despite having the will to destroy it. Thanks to this dual nature, beasts are technically a class of heroic spirit, a necessary part of humanity that aims to undermine itself. Just as Earth plays on both sides of its own conflict, the throne has its own method of counteracting the beasts. By that, I refer to the Grand Servants. Rather than a separate class, Grand Servants are the pinnacle of their respective classes. While the Beast class has 7 unique slots that can each be occupied by a different candidate, each of the 7 original classes can have its Grand Representative. Think of it like a special privilege the Counterforce gives to 7 distinct servants. Said privilege is handed out based on certain criteria and can be revoked when that criteria no longer applies. Fundamentally, what is up for grabs is an expanded saint graph. As I mentioned in my lesson on servant classes, any given hero must fit within the limitations of a servant saint graph. If a hero exceeds those limitations, they must lose some of their potential to fit the container of a servant. For instance, pure gods must sacrifice a portion of their divinity to qualify as a servant. This may seem contradictory, as we'd expect having more strength would be objectively better. Nonetheless, these limitations remain in place, and only grand servants are able to exceed them. Perhaps this is a protective measure. Originally, humans were never supposed to summon servants of their own. The Throne of Heroes was not meant for mages to pilfer servants from as their own familiars. Thus, the servants encountered most often can be considered a degraded form of existence. Should that actually be the case, it would be a shame, as it implies only a small percentage of the throne could ever be used. The requirements to be a grand are simply too restrictive, so I believe it's nice that ordinary or lesser servants still serve a purpose, even with limitations. The main qualifier for a grand servant is for a hero to be the strongest in their class during the era in which they lived. Given the many generations of human history, this implies that there are multiple candidates for each class. The only exception, at first anyway, was the Grand Assassin, which was reserved exclusively for the original Hassan-i-Saba. The only reason other servants are able to claim the top assassin spot is due to King Hassan's own choice to forego it. More specifically, Hassan chose to use his power as Grand in order to aid the Chaldea security organization. It is a very strange requirement, but Grand servants are meant to protect all of humanity, and not just a single faction or individual. Even though Chaldea also aims to protect humanity, aiding them is interpreted as favoritism and grounds for disqualification. Rather, it is better to say that a Grand servant cannot use their privileged abilities to help Chaldea. So long as their actions fall within the limits of a normal servant, there's no violation. After they exceed their potential, however, their Grand status is revoked. In King Hassan's case, he descended on Tiamat, imposing the concept of death upon her, despite her immortality. One could argue that, had he not done so, humanity would have perished under Gaetia's incineration. Furthermore, Tiamat was one of the beasts, the very targets that Grand servants are summoned to defeat. Apparently, that is not for us to decide, and the counterforce operates on logic different than our own. After the first Hassan returned to the potential of a normal servant, his spot as Grand Assassin was up for grabs by other qualifying heroes. The one who claimed this position was Tezcatlipoca, an Aztec god of warfare. This is yet another leap in logic we must simply accept. Gods, or divine spirits, are supposed to be disqualified by default. Tezcatlipoca, however, is not an ordinary god. Throughout history, he often took on human vessels, qualifying him as a human worshipped as a god rather than a god unto himself. That, and his close association with death and mountains, made him a fitting replacement for Hassan. I suppose that, sometimes, protecting humanity as a whole does not mean bringing peace to humans. Instead, Tezcatlipoca supports warfare itself, refusing to choose sides in a given conflict. Somehow, though, him aiding Daebit Sem Void to bring about humanity's destruction never disqualified him. Well, this certainly wouldn't be my first criticism of the counterforce, though. Oddly enough, before Hassan revoked his title, Tezcatlipoca was originally the Grand Berserker. He likely would have remained in that role, but was essentially forced to switch to an assassin due to his compatibility with the newly opened position. As a result, Grand Berserker remains a vacant seat in the throne. Another case of a human worshipped as a god comes from Romulus Quirinus, the Grand Lancer. Ironically, his ascension as a god can be thought of as a departure from the Age of Gods, a deified form of modernity. By extension, he used his power as a Grand Servant to fight against the gods of Olympus in a lost belt. Just like Hassan, though, Romulus quickly lost his Grand status by helping Chaldea destroy Chaos, the very source of the Greek machine gods. He now continues to fight for Chaldea as an ordinary Lancer, and his Grand replacement has yet to appear. That very same lost belt debuted Orion as the Grand Archer. Orion was a demigod and didn't need to rely on bizarre exceptions to qualify as a Grand. He was, after all, Greece's finest hunter, who could bring down any prey with his bow. It was in part his clinging to humanity that sparked tension between him and his lover Artemis. Orion's mortality eventually led to his death by Artemis's arrow. Poetic then that Orion, as the Grand Archer, would aim his bow to slay her. However, the machine form of Artemis was no beast of humanity. Striking her down was yet another act in service to Chaldea. Thus, he too continues this endeavor as an ordinary archer servant, with no one else taking up his mantle. Noah, famous through the Old Testament, was known for building an ark that could survive 40 days of storms and another 150 days at sea. He weathered God's purge of the earth with a crew of animals meant to survive when the waters receded. According to legend, Noah was a progenitor of mankind, living as a Jewish patriarch. He would later be summoned as the Grand Rider for the purpose of defeating Sodom's beast, the whore of Babylon from the Book of Revelations. Unfortunately, injuries led him to fuse with Chaldea's servant, Captain Nemo, and upon confronting Sodom's beast as the bewitching Queen Draco, he used all of his strength to disperse her massive tsunami. Whether or not Noah's fusion with Nemo disqualified him as a Grand Rider remains to be seen. The title of Grand Caster used to be held by Solomon, fittingly referred to as the King of Magecraft. As Israel's third king, he sought wisdom over power, and was granted 10 rings of knowledge from God that represent the magecraft of angels and demons. While he was blessed by God, Solomon brought the practice of magecraft to the common man, and taught 2 of the clock tower's still living mages, Lord Brishsan and Keisher Zelrech Schweinorg. No other mage in the world could rival his prowess, making him the perfect candidate for Grand Caster. However, there are no documents claiming he was ever summoned in this capacity. Rather, his 72 demon god familiars, collectively known as Gaetia, masqueraded as him and used his grand servant abilities to incinerate human history. This was not a legitimate manifestation, and before there could be one, Solomon chose to settle the matter by casting his noble phantasm, Ars Nova. By returning his rings to heaven, he effectively shut down Gaetia and removed himself from the throne of heroes, completing a life with no unfinished business. Doing so left the position of Grand Caster open to other mages possessing sufficient clairvoyance. Since that time, Grand Caster has been taken up by Merlin, the court mage associated with King Arthur, as well as the paladins of Charlemagne. While Merlin does occasionally assist Chaldea, it appears he hasn't tapped into his grand status for their sake, and thus continues to hold the title. Despite the appearance of all other grand servants, a grand saber has yet to be properly summoned. Our only clue lies within the dreams of Olga Marie, in which she claims to have fought and defeated all 7. If there's any accuracy to this, it would imply that the Grand Saber is actually Artoria Avalon, a fairy who only came to exist through the British Lost Belt. She only remains a servant through Chaldea's database, as a caster no less. Rather than blindly trust in ominous dreams, I assert that, as of right now anyway, we still do not know who actually qualifies as Grand Saber. That accounts for all 7 servant classes. The extra classes were never a part of the Counterforce's vision, and as such, should not have grand variants. That said, there could always be a different universe where the circumstances are different. In that capacity, Chaldea had the unfortunate privilege of encountering a theoretical Grand Foreigner. Desperate to survive within the Mesoamerican Lost Belt, the alien creature Ort found itself relying on the various servants it consumed. Each of those servants, in effect, constitute a portion of human history, and with enough servants, it became possible for Ort to simulate that history. After simulating 300 million years worth of false history, Ort found a theoretical timeline in which it existed as a heroic spirit. Before completely dying out, it then summoned itself as a servant Chaldea refers to as Ort Shibalba. This is perhaps the most extreme abuse of power covered in this course, leaving behind room for even greater exploitation. Trying to best Ort Shibalba in a fight is futile, as it can simply re-summon itself as a version from an even longer false history. In other words, through standard combat, it would merely resurrect with greater strength upon defeat. As the goddess Kukulkan proves, only Ort can defeat Ort. While this might technically count as a grand servant, it's quite possible we will never encounter such a being again. I don't expect Grand Foreigner to remain a position for other servants. Then again, it has happened once, so I must admit that anything is possible. In summation, the true purpose of heroic spirits is to combat beasts of humanity, creatures born from our inherent, unescapable evils. The pinnacle of all heroic spirits are called Grand Servants, and they possess a saintcraft that vastly exceeds the limitations of servants typically summoned in Holy Grail wars. We've already encountered most of the 7 grand classes, or rather representatives of them. Should one servant abandon the title of Grand, another servant may take their place. In addition to being the best of their kind, candidates must fight to protect humanity as a whole. This often leads to a conflict of interest between the counterforce and human factions like Chaldea. Even if these forces appear to share the same goal, Grand Servants are punished for helping Chaldea. Thus, so long as Chaldea also fights to protect humanity, there's a likelihood that Grand Servants will continue to break the rules and lose their Grand status. Since servants are typically human themselves, they seem to either misunderstand their greater purpose or deliberately forsake it to protect us under a different interpretation. After all, what exactly does it mean to preserve humanity? There appears to be more than one answer. Perhaps one day we will be able to clarify this confusion, but not at this present moment. Thus, our next lesson will instead clarify a different mystery, that being the world-devouring spider, or the one radiant thing. Thanks for watching. This channel relies on support from viewers like you.
Please help us out by dropping a like and comment. Subscribe for more videos, and be sure to enable notifications. Or hit up our Discord so you never miss out on a new upload.
Most importantly, if you can spare it, please sign up as a channel member, either through YouTube, Patreon, or Subscribestar. You can find links in the description. We've got perks like exclusive content or early access.
Until next time,
Celebrate your fandom. I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, Dante Pendragon, Steven Elak, Otaku Mom, Mystic Samurai 1983, Free Brick, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Lunar Works, Link Pendrago, Olympian Doll, Observer Bellis, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Crow Calum, Saul Soto, Tristan Riggin, Major, Winter's Edge, Sneer Cachette, Sunbro Torian, Dionysus, Caitlin P, Sogai CH, Sith Lord 906, Vladimir Ovna, The Taz 96, Kengo X 77, and Alistair Bernadotte. Thank you all so much.